You know, I don't think it will actually, because it's still a great medium until somebody invents a cheap electronic paper different from a Kindle, which I still think is too complex and too expensive for the average person. I think there's still going to be a place for newspaper. But what I do think is 7-day-a-week, large metropolitan papers or even smaller community papers, it's not viable based on the revenue that's coming, and that really we have to start. What you'll see is news organizations that do not identify themselves with a form of distribution. They're information companies, knowledge companies that then distribute on video, they distribute databases, or they make available databases. They do print editions, they do specialty magazines, they do whatever works for the customer and the advertiser, and whatever makes sense financially. And if it doesn't make sense to produce something, we're going to have to find financial sense to do it. We'll have to find a different way to do it. We've spent an enormous amount of money doing things that don't have much value. Like, why does the New York Post and the New York Daily News, why do they have to have separate people producing the NBA box scores in their newspaper? What added value for the customer are they producing? Shouldn't we put our efforts where they really provide value to the user, wherever the user is, wanting to read at his kitchen table, riding a bus, being halfway across the world and wanting to know what's going on in New York City? Why can't we create value that way? And I think we can, because you can see people paying for content, but they pay for content that they perceive provides them benefit or value, entertainment or otherwise. I think they'll become more of a conversation along the line of a blog where the reader participates and expertise from outside starts to moderate what we see published. If you look at Wikipedia, Wikipedia is a brilliant and successful media initiative. I mean, they've created a new form of encyclopedia that's living, it's breathing. And the idea of a Wikipedia for a community, like, shouldn't the local news organization be the in-depth resource for a community? So if you know more about healthcare, for example, and healthcare financing and healthcare insurance, why shouldn't you be able to work with me as we're explaining, how the Obama administration's healthcare policies will affect Colorado? So I think the involving of and bringing people in will be a really important part of whatever anything looks like, that interactivity, that conversation, that inclusiveness, that it's not us telling you, it's actually us working with you and trying to understand and answer your questions, but you, the reader, will be answering questions as well. I think we're in a much more participatory world. I actually think that's better. And we might have more information, but we have to think of ourselves maybe as more curators and moderators and not just as originators. Typically, with local media companies, they thought they had to produce everything. That was the only way to trust anything. I think we're in a different era. The internet is self-policing. There's ways that things can be checked for accuracy because others look at them and comment on them. And so I'm not pessimistic about the future. I'm actually optimistic about it. I just recognize I don't know what it's going to look like, and the solutions are not necessarily going to come from the traditional media companies, whether they're Scripps or Hearst or McClatchy or the New York Times. Well, they at least contribute to correcting it, because let's say, let's take healthcare, and we have a single payer, somebody with a single payer perspective to health insurance, but then we have a free market, and shouldn't we be the people to encourage dialogue and create an environment for the dialogue? Because if it's not going to happen on our site, and if we're not going to be able to inform it and answer the questions, it's going to happen somewhere else, and we will die, and there'll be some new form. I mean, I think the most conventional view of the future is everything is going to become much more opinionated. You're going to sort of go to your own affinity group and your own, also I'm a single payer person, so I'm only going to read people who believe that's the way the world should look, and I'm going to find people who think like me, and that's where I'm going to congregate. And that is a legitimate point of view, and that very well may be what happens. I'm hoping, I'm not of the mind that that's what I want to see happen. I would like to see a richer environment than that, where people get connected to views other than their own. And I think Wikipedia is an example of that, where they try to create reliable, though it is not always reliable, but either is the mainstream media. And this idea that, there's been this glory days of newspapers when everything was perfect. Are you kidding me? I mean, newspapers have always tried to sell newspapers. There's been a sensational aspect to some. There's been different things done to create customer interest and to keep loyalty. So, it's not like there was this great days of newspapers and our democracy was so perfect and now it's terrible. I actually think it's better now because more people can participate and there's a greater ability to learn more quickly. If you think of the tools available to a journalist today versus the tools available even 20 years ago, it's so incredible. I mean, just using search engines to find information, using the fact that a journalist on the street could have an iPhone or a BlackBerry where he or she's opening documents, reading things. I mean, it moves so much more quickly. Now, that requires a highly skilled journalist. And how are we going to pay for the highly skilled journalist? What kind of organization can train and develop those people? We don't have the answer to that question yet.